You got your...
Can you hear us?
Nope.
I couldn't hear.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Edible Education 101. I'm Will Rosenzweig. I'm going to be your guide this semester. It's just wonderful to be here and see and feel the energy. This is going to be a really exciting year. We've got an amazing group of guest speakers coming to see you. We're going to start tonight with the theme about the urgent call for food systems transformation. A lot's happened even since last semester, and I'm going to try and cover that for you to see why this semester is probably more important than any other one that we've had in the past. And we've also got a very special guest with us today. Jack Algier is here all the way from the Hudson Valley of New York to share with us his insights about how farms are playing an incredibly important role, and farming is playing an incredibly important role in addressing food systems challenges. So tonight, I thought we could get started with something that's been on my mind. I've been thinking a lot about serendipity. Does anybody know what that is, serendipity? Is that word familiar to you? Serendipity is a term that was coined by Horace Walpole in about 1754. I wrote down his definition. He called it the faculty of making happy and unexpected discoveries by accident. The faculty of making happy and unexpected discoveries by accident. Now, I like to think of it as these inexplicable experiences that lead to auspicious results. Like, imagine yourself, you're sitting here today in this auditorium at Anderson in the Haas School of Business on the UC Berkeley campus, and you're in a certain place at a certain time thinking about certain things. And so I thought I'd start the class tonight with a story about a young woman who was going into her junior year at UC Berkeley. I think she was an English major, but that's her at a French market in Paris surveying the vegetables. Can you see that? I'm just going to check and make sure. Yeah, that's working. And then a year later, you might find her at a rally in downtown San Francisco. Do you see her peeking out of the crowd there? And then the next year, she found herself on this very campus standing watching an organized talk about the free speech movement. Well, it wasn't soon after that she graduated, and a couple years later she started teaching Montessori school and teaching children about how to learn from natural systems. Her next step was this: she started to cook for people, and she opened a restaurant. Does anybody know who this is? This is Alice Waters. So Alice Waters is, I'm doing this, showing you these pictures, because if she was here tonight, she wouldn't let me do that. In her own way, she's very humble, but she has, this picture I love because this is her at the Edible Schoolyard project where she's been teaching thousands and thousands of children how to cook and how to eat, and has created a curriculum that makes food relevant for every subject. And I thought with Martin Luther King Day occurring yesterday, it would be also apropos to share this picture with you. What I learned from Alice, I met Alice about 30 years ago maybe, and what she taught me was that when you have an idea, you can feed it to someone. And so she had this idea about 8 or 9 years ago to hold a class at UC Berkeley, her alma mater, about food and food education. So she fed that idea to this guy, Michael Pollan, the brilliant writer who has written such beautiful books like The Botany of Desire, one of my all-time favorites, In Defense of Food, where he coined the haiku, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. You know that one? And then, of course, his masterpiece was The Omnivores Dilemma. So he, with Alice's support, and I might say nudging, started this class about 8 years ago. That's why we're here. And I was thinking about, we have actually almost every year of this class on archived on video. So you'll find that during the semester, we don't really have time to touch on every topic that's relevant right now for the food system. This class actually comes together rather serendipitously because it's who's here and who are we talking to and who can come to campus and what topics. So it all comes together in kind of a magical way. And the other thing that's really interesting about this class is that it is open to the whole campus community and beyond. So we have about 140 students enrolled. We have another 20 or 30 auditing. And then it's also live streamed. So we have hundreds of people around the world paying attention. And this year we're actually going to try to include more of the online audience by taking their questions through the YouTube channel. So I was thinking about this manifestation. How do ideas become, in Alice's case, how do they become a movement? Or in Michael's case, how do they become a book? Or, so how does an idea take flight? And I started thinking about what is that process and why is that process important to each of you this year with the theme of this class being take action. So to me, it starts with curiosity. Somebody gets curious about something, an idea takes a hold of them, and then their passion is ignited in that curiosity, and they become immersed in this subject. They start researching it. What's fascinating to me about Michael Pollan's journey is it was sort of the perfect position for him to be a journalist because he had free range to ask any question of anyone. He wasn't specialized in one area. He could let his curiosity really wander. And then after curiosity, there's immersion. So you're immersing yourself deeply. Following immersion, you kind of step back and you reflect on what you're learning. You're starting to make connections between disparate ideas. And then after reflection, you start to integrate. You start to make new connections, new visions, new ideas coming from disparate information. And then you somehow find the courage, the will, the necessity to act, to go into action. So as I was reflecting on this was very much the same kind of process that I experienced when I was working in the food industry as an entrepreneur and an investor. And I wanted to, acknowledge that that whole cycle kind of becomes enabled by the magic of serendipity. So a number of years ago, when I was sort of dreaming and designing and then leading the really talented team that created the Republic of Tea, was the same kind of process, a curiosity around why can't we get good tea in this country, and what would it mean to bring it to life in the form of a metaphor So I became the minister of progress of the Republic of Tea and invited people to become citizens of a tea movement, not just to buy another tea bag. And then after that, I used that same process, the curiosity of how could we grow businesses that focus on health and sustainability using science to come to market and change and transform food, health, and the environment. Now, you're in a room tonight, serendipitously, with people with very different, very diverse backgrounds and fields of studies. I was really amazed to see the roster of enrollment. We have undergrads in almost every field of study. I mean, of course, we've got people from environmental science and we've got people from nutrition, but we've also got anthropologists, linguists, architects, cognitive scientists. We have people from the School of Public Policy, the School of Public Health. We even have a couple of lawyers from the law school in here. And what makes me really excited about that is that it's going to require that kind of cross-disciplinary experience, perspective, and insight to solve the kinds of problems that we're going to be talking about this year. So to get started, I'm hoping that you're serendipitously sitting next to somebody that you don't know. And if you are, what I'd like you to do, or even if you're not, what I'd like you to do is think about for a second your most memorable meal in your life. And think about what comes to you. And then what I'd like you to do, I'm going to give you 3 minutes to turn to the person nearest to you and tell them about that meal, what you remember about it, what you know about it, who were you with, what were you eating, how did you feel, where did the food come from, and then we'll go from there, okay? And I brought this magic bell to wake you up so you'll know. So start now with, and I'll say switch in 3 minutes, okay? And if you're at home watching this, do it with somebody that you're with at home. Yeah. So far, so good. Okay, switch now. Switch turns. Have the other person describe the meal. Thank you. So tonight or maybe tomorrow morning, I'd love for you to reflect on these conversations that you have and think about what you know about that meal and what you don't know. What do you know about the healthfulness or unhealthfulness, so to speak, or the nutritive quality of the food you ate? What do you know about where it came from? Who grew it, or how did it get from the farm to your fork? Do you know anything about that? Where did it travel? Whose hands touched it? What were the people who were responsible for bringing it to you or preparing it for you? So I'd love for you to kind of use this experience tonight to start to maybe map out. I think next week, one of the things I'd love to do is share with you some of the tools that entrepreneurs and innovators use to transform ideas into enterprises or campaigns or movements, if you will. So think about this, take some notes, and then next week we'll develop a little bit of a map, a mind map of the system for your most memorable meal. And maybe, who knows, maybe just in that serendipitous moment of meeting somebody new in a class where you have a shared connection, you'll have met your future business partner or life partner or dinner partner, who knows? Well, we'll see. So what's different about now? I was thinking about this, so much has changed, and if you're like me, I get pretty anxious and a little bit exhausted reading the news these days. So, we've got a federal shutdown right now, and a lot of food isn't getting inspected. That's an issue. These are all headlines, by the way, of the last week, and you'll have to forgive me. I hope you can read them, but the news is that even since last November, when the big climate reports came out, it looks like the models were underestimating the warmth of the oceans and the atmosphere. So what are we going to do about that? Last fall, there was just a seminal report by something called the Inter-Academy Partnership, the IAP, which is the collection of all the scientific bodies around the world, and they basically issued a report saying the food system is fundamentally broken. Now, Alice has been saying that for 30 years, and Michael and others, but what's interesting to me about this moment of time is that this idea about our reliance on food and food's central connection to our well-being, the Greeks would call that our eudaimonia, our hope for flourishing. So the planet's well-being and our human well-being are all tied together, and it really kind of all comes down to food. And I couldn't help but show you this chart just to get some perspective, because many of the people in this room are, I don't know, under 25 years old. Each one of those segments in this chart is 50,000 years. So you can see how this is of carbon levels in the atmosphere, and you can see how they've kind of varied over time, and people have made arguments, well, this is just a blip. But if you note, in just the last 50 years, how many years have we had automobiles? 120, 130, 110? So this is pretty staggering, and if you're like me, some nights you can feel pretty hopeless and pretty paralyzed. So I thought it would be very interesting this year to bring our most optimistic and courageous selves to class and rely on really the trailblazing thinkers that are going to come to class this year, and then some of the readings that they've recommended and some of the readings that I found for you. So last fall, there's been 4 really important reports. I haven't assigned them as reading because they're dense, but if you're really interested in this topic, I would encourage you to look at them. So this was the IPCC report on climate change, basically saying that we're blowing through the 1.5 degree limit that the Paris Accord set, and that the consequences are going to be pretty dire, and we basically only have about less than 20 years to really act. This report is the IAP report on the food system and starts to say we need a real prescription for what to do. This report was actually the government's, the United States government's issue on report on climate change, the Intergovernmental Report on Climate Change, which seemed to fall on a lot of deaf ears as there's a lot of distraction. And then the final report that just came out last week is the EAT Lancet report. Lancet is probably the premier public health medical journal in the world. For those of you in the public health program, you know about it. But this is actually a prescription for a planetary health diet. And it's very exciting, it's very actionable, and we're gonna get into different facets of it. So I found these reports to be really helpful. This was a quote from the opening of that report. Civilization is in crisis. We can no longer feed our population a healthy diet while balancing planetary resources. If we can eat in a way that works for our planet as well as our bodies, the natural balance will be restored. So, you know, in addition to those sort of big picture issues, there's also just like a plethora of weekly, like an assault. Like everywhere I turn, there's something happening with food that just like makes my head turn. So 2 days ago, Munchery, was anybody a customer of the Munchery? Yeah, Adrian. Munchery was one of the first meal delivery companies. You know, they started by first sending you groceries, then they pivoted and they started sending you meals that you could cook, and then they pivoted again and tried to do, well, anyway, they raised $125 million and they just closed down. So, and you know, this is one of those ones where I get to kind of say, I told you so, I saw that one when it was coming. But what's interesting about it, in the same week that $125 million was acknowledged as being flushed down the drain, 2 new companies were funded. One is a dog food delivery company, got a $30 million investment, and this one really kind of was interesting. A birth control pill delivery company got a $51 million investment. So the lesson here really is, for those of us that are particularly in this Silicon Valley bubble that we live in, just because a company gets an investment and then the press starts calling that company like, oh, it's a $125 million company because it's received that investment, don't believe it. So this is a call to being skeptical about headlines and financings. This one really boggled my mind. Did anybody see this yesterday? Bud Light is putting a nutrition facts label on their package. Isn't that cool? Like, isn't that great? Now, it's not required by law that they do that, but they're trying to get ahead. Some of the big food companies are trying to get ahead of this kind of game before Congress makes them do it, you know. So this label is basically showing you, hey, Bud Light, it's only got 110 calories, it's got absolutely nothing redeemable about it, and it's pretty low in carbs, but hey, we are complying with the nutrition labels. So, you know, if you're tracking some of the issues in food and alcohol, there's a lot of pressure on the food industry from the same people that put a lot of pressure on the tobacco industry to take responsibility for the obesity crisis and its related chronic conditions. The next one that came to mind was, this was a US PIRG story, which is the Public Interest Research Group. They actually just said that between 2013, I believe, in the last 5 years, 2013, 14, and this year, there's been an 83% increase in serious foodborne illness recalls in the food system. Why is that? Did anybody miss romaine lettuce a few weeks ago? Remember that? So what's happening? Why is this? Why are there more problems? And how amazing it is that 30 states are all of a sudden affected, right? And then I love, this was a little bit of good news. One of our heroes, Jose Andreas, is feeding the furloughed workers and actually got members of Congress from the different sides of the aisle together. Do you know Jose? Hopefully we're going to have him here next year. He's just a remarkable chef and an activist, a person that really speaks out, and he uses food to bring people together. So he's been feeding the furloughed workers in soup kitchens that he's opened in Washington, D.C., and he just announced today that he's going to open 30 more in 12 states in the next 2 weeks. So a shout out to Jose for his good work on that. So, you know, there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of changes, and what's exciting to me is that with all this kind of crossing of the chasm, it becomes pretty clear that food is really, so to speak, the low-hanging fruit that we can take action on right away. There's so much interest in food. We're all connected to food every day. And last year we had Paul Hawken come to class, and he presented this project Drawdown, which is a very pragmatic assessment of where we can make changes in various systems in our world that can draw down carbon to a level that should mitigate the dire consequences of climate change. And this is kind of a difficult chart to see, but I just wanted you to see that this is an assessment of like all the places that we could intervene in our climate system. And that big red block in the top left corner, that's food. These are all food-related activities to lower carbon emissions significantly. So things like a plant-based diet really move the needle. Plant-centric diet. That doesn't mean becoming vegetarian or vegan. It means eating less meat. Food waste is a huge issue. Silvopasture, regenerative agriculture, things our guests will talk about in a little bit of time. But what's really exciting to me is that this is all within grasp, and with the drawdown work and the IAP report and the Eat Lancet report, this is all sort of rising up to a level where we can coordinate our activities together. So that's kind of the background of what's different. I wanted to share with you my intentions for this course. I kind of have three. The first is I would love it for you to be able to develop food systems intelligence. Food systems intelligence. What do I mean by food systems intelligence? Well, that means that you're able to kind of peer into the food system and understand how things are connected and start to understand the implications of how different decisions manifest in the food system. You start to develop kind of that skeptical eye about what you hear or read or see. You start to maybe understand where to intervene in a system, and you start to be able to peer through a lot of the opacity that's been created in the food system by organizations that have a real vested interest in maintaining things the way they've been. Okay, so that's food systems intelligence. We'll think more about that. The next intention is for you to become an enlightened eater. That's ambitious, an enlightened eater. What do I mean by that? An enlightened eater is somebody that understands, or it's sort of, let's put it this way, they kind of wake up to eating. They don't just eat habitually, or they don't just eat because mindlessly. They're sort of thinking about why they're eating and what they're eating and who maybe is not eating, and they become much more kind of sensitive to how the food system is working or not working. I also think for an enlightened eater, there's a heightened sense of understanding your own values. What do you believe? And it's very complicated with food. You know, you'll hear one group of people yelling, GMOs are terrible. And then you'll hear another group of people saying, GMOs are fine. And then this group says, well, GMOs themselves aren't the problem. It's the pesticides that are seeping into the foods that are toxic. That's the problem. So you'll see on every issue, there is, like everything else in our world right now, a very polarized, bifurcated perspective. So an enlightened eater delves deep, looks at the science, rigorously examines his or her own perspective and opinions, and starts to get an objective view, and then can make informed choices that align with one's values. So that's an enlightened eater, somebody that's eating in alignment with their own values. And then the third intention is for you to really be able to design a take-action plan. I think that it would be extraordinary if we could put to work the intelligence and potential and capability of this classroom and all the people that are watching the live stream to really apply ourselves in a way that we could make a dent in that big red box and really address the urgent crisis before us. So those are my intentions for the course, and I hope maybe after class tonight you'll think a little bit more about what your intention is and what you want to get out of the course so that you can participate actively. At the last half hour, we usually spend in conversation with you. We also ask you to read the papers that we assign, and we get your questions. And so we do the best we can with this large room to make it as interactive as possible, but possibly you'll find some allies in the room too with whom you can work on these topics. So I was also thinking about, well, what if, each one of us made a little tiny change? Say this plant-based diet, if that went global, that could just change the world in many ways in terms of, well, you'll see as we move through the semester, but you'll see like little changes can make really huge differences, not only in our lives, but in the lives of people very far away. It's like a butterfly effect. We can make a little change here and it can affect somebody's life and livelihood in Africa. So we were thinking about the collective impact of these changes that we could make. And I was thinking about that if you were to think about the number of times you eat during the day, including like meals, snacks, like how many meal occasions do you have? And then think about the number of years you have left to live. It's hard to ponder, but if you're born now, if you're born in 2018, your life expectancy in North America is 80 years for a man and 84 years if you're a woman. And so we were thinking about and then if you took that and you multiplied it times 365 days for the year, that would be your sort of individual impact. So Victoria and I did a little bit of estimating. We figured, okay, people are eating kind of 4 times a day. If you're 21 years old now and you live to 80, you have 59 years left. That you multiply that times 365, you're like 85, 86, 87,000 more meals in your own lifetime. That's a lot of eating. That's a lot of bags of chips. Now, if you were to take that and put it inside this room, just the 170 people that are here, or 180 people that are here tonight, and multiply it out, you get a little over 15 million meals. So just the people in this room tonight are going to have an influence over 15 million meals in the time when this critically urgent challenge is afoot. So just think about that. Okay, now, important information, change gears. How does this class work? Little housekeeping. This year we're going to take attendance with a digital tool called Kahoot. We've spared you the expense and difficulty of dealing with an iClicker. To use Kahoot, you're going to need some technology, and Victoria's going to come up in a minute and explain to you how it works. We would appreciate it if you don't use any other tech other than maybe your cell phone or your laptop to do the attendance. It's just easier for the speakers. So if you have your laptop, we really appreciate if you keep it closed during the lecture. And if you want to use notes and paper, that's great. But it just helps us in this big auditorium keep everybody's focus. We'd love it if you wouldn't mind just filling up the lower part of the auditorium. We expect we'll probably have about this many people each week, but on some weeks when we have people with a little higher name recognition, if you will, or who have their own TV shows and stuff like that, the auditorium tends to fill up. So it's really nice for the speakers when there's a lot of people sitting up front. So if you can do that, that would be great. I really encourage you to review the syllabus thoroughly. We put a lot of work into it. There's a lot of detail in it. And also be sure you check B courses regularly because there is an element of improvisation to this class. We will come up with a new reading. One of the students will recommend a reading. One of the speakers will recommend a reading. And so you got to stay tuned. Also, the assignments, there are 2 papers of 4 to 5 pages in length, and we don't have those designed yet. They will emerge out of the conversation, so you'll have to find those there as well. And the weekly questions from now on, we gave you a little break because we had a holiday on Monday, but they're due Sunday night, okay? If you have some problem with B courses and it's not working, or your dog ate your computer, or something like that, you need to email Victoria, who's the GSI in the class, and let her know that you have an attendance problem. And if you have an excused attendance, that's fine, but 25% of your grade is dependent on you being here and participating at night, okay? So I want to introduce you to the teaching team. We have really a fabulous group of people who make this all possible. There's 4 graduate students who are going to grade your papers, so getting to know them and being nice to them is a really good idea. I'll get to you in just a second. So we have Victoria. Victoria's going to come up in a minute. Fiona, I know where Fiona is. Fiona, Maria is over here, and John. So they're also available. They'll stick around for a few minutes after class. There's also people that have been instrumental in getting this course going, and my dear colleague Hannah Love from the Edible Schoolyard Project really plays point on orchestrating the whole semester for you, and Emily Pellissier from the Center for Responsible Business is here. And then, of course, a big shout out to the AV team for working so efficiently to get all of this live stream set up on the fly. Okay, you're on. Victoria's going to take attendance.
Great. So, like Will said, I'm Victoria. Feel free to email me with any questions, problems, concerns you have. This is not the most exciting thing, but as Will said, attendance is 25% of your grade. It's important that you're here, given that this class is really based on the amazing speakers and content and discussion that happens right here. So the way that it'll work is that we are going to do it through a program called Kahoot. These are the steps. We're about to go through it. It'll be some minor miracle if this all actually works, so we'll try it out. But as Will mentioned, it gets us away from the eye clickers and hopefully will be a little bit more fun than that. So what you're gonna do, and start doing this now, take out your laptop or your phone and go to kahoot.it. It's not .com, it's .it. In a minute, you're going to see a PIN number pop up and you're gonna enter that in. The next step will ask for a nickname. Please enter your full name and the first 3 letters of your name. If you enter Alex, when I'm going back to look at it, I don't know who Alex is. I don't know if it's Alexandra, Alexander, there's probably 5 Alexes in here. So if you want credit for showing up and being here right now, please put in your full name. And then you won't be graded based on kind of like how you answer the question. You'll get a grade no matter what. Answer honestly. It's kind of an opportunity for us to do a pulse check. So I'm going to flip over to that, and so hopefully you guys will remember this. Questions?
Just real quick, if we're not Berkeley students, do we need to do this?
If you are taking this class for credit of whether like pass, no pass, or anything else, you do need to do it. If you're here to audit it, members of the community, you can do it if you want to say what your favorite reading was or like why you're excited to be here, but it's certainly not necessary. Great point.
Okay, there. Oh, technical difficulty. It's like Alex Trebek, you know. It's. I knew it wasn't going to be flawless, but.
I can also say the number is 871-591. Again, that's 871-591. We're gonna need to see it though.
Somehow we just lost our picture, huh? How interesting.
I can see that 112
Okay.
of you so far have logged in, so good job. Keep it
Okay,
up.
well,
I think we're
we'll-
trying to
we'll-
get to like 150.
We've never rehearsed this before, but
People can keep signing in. We'll usually cut it off so you can kind of see it. You will see it in a second as the number of people continues. So I think there's about, 140 people signed up for the class. So I want to make sure everyone gets the chance to hop into it.
okay. Maybe we'll skip the questions
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do it.
Yeah.
We can do it.
this week.
That works. Okay.
We'll troubleshoot this for you next
We'll
week.
do a final call, so if for some reason you just kind of input your information and you had an issue and you think for whatever reason it didn't work, please see me quickly after class and say that you had a tech issue, and I will mark you down that way, but otherwise it looks like we have like over 120 people on here, so I think we're good.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Were there any other questions about this part? Okay, great. Onward. So that was Are You Here Tonight? Yes. Okay, one other quick announcement from Fiona on expanding our impact with communicating about edible ed.
So we're so happy to have you guys all here in the classroom, and obviously we'll be doing a lot of learning and discussing here. But a big goal of the course, especially being in its 8th year, is to expand this conversation to other students at Berkeley, members of the Bay Area community, and really beyond that. So we want to get more people thinking about food and how it connects to so many of the important things Will has discussed. And one great way to do that is through social media. So as Will mentioned, we do discourage tech use in class, but we do encourage you to write down your favorite quote, question, thought from class, and participate online in the conversation afterwards. So we're going to use the Edible Ed hashtag, and we just launched our exciting new Instagram and Twitter account for the class. So please tag us, tag the speakers, and you might end up in a conversation with Michael Pollan. He just retweeted the class today, so it's exciting stuff. And you can let me know if you have any questions about engaging in that conversation.
Thanks, Fiona. Perfect. So just a few minutes, I'm going to ask Jack to come up and share with us his view of how a farm functions as a system. But I thought in our quest to become enlightened eaters and develop food systems intelligence, we'd take a look at systems. And I had to do a little bit of reading about systems. It's very complicated to map a complicated system. You know, this is a model that shows lots of flows and patterns. Systems diagrams can identify risks in a system. They can identify leverage points. They show where things are connected, where there are unintended consequences and intended consequences. But it's very difficult to map the entire ethos of a system. And with food, it's really difficult because food is such an emotional, cultural subject or part of our lives. It's really our sustenance, our source of being and meaning in some cases. So this diagram is a global food system. This one is one that is kind of interesting. This is kind of a linear flow of looking at kind of a process in the food system. And what's interesting about it, up until just a few years ago, you wouldn't even find food waste at this end, waste management, composting, reclaimed. This is new, literally. If you think that's crazy, because here in Berkeley, we're a little bit ahead of the curve, and we have the greenest academic building in the country on our campus next door. But this idea that food waste is actually part of the food system is a relatively new idea. Again, it's really encouraging to me because it's catching on so quickly, and as we've seen, it's something we can all do something about quite quickly. The other thing I shared with you was Donella Meadows' systems dance. Donella Meadows was one of the great environmental scientists of her time. She was a professor at MIT. And what I loved about this list that I asked you to read about was that it's kind of like the words of a poet, or a musician. She starts about like, get the beat. What does she mean? Like, how do you get the beat of a system? Well, a system has a rhythm, a system has a flow, a system has a tempo. And so how do you get the beat of the system? So I was thinking about like, well, when you want to get the flow of a system, you don't just like read about the collective parts, you start to try to understand like how they're moving. She also talks about staying humble, staying a learner, like just that it's always going to be changing, we're always changing, it's a dynamic environment. This idea of honoring and protecting information, locating responsibility. There's a couple more that I just wanted to call out. I like this one. Pay attention to what is important, not just quantifiable. That's coming from a really rigorous scientist. So good advice. Go for the good of the whole. Go for the good of the whole. That's something that is scarce in society these days. This notion of that we live in a commons, and when you start thinking about the food system and that we're growing all of everything we eat in this very thin layer of atmosphere, we really are connected in an incredible way. Expand time horizons. It's another thing. This is developing food systems intelligence and becoming an enlightened eater. It's like extending. How can we look to the end of our lives, look back at our collective impact? Expand thought horizons. It's what I love. I hope you'll learn something from somebody who's studying something completely different from you this year. And the range of speakers that we have coming, we have researchers and scientists, we have business executives, we have chefs, we have farmers, we have public policy experts, we have people who are expert in the Farm Bill. It's just an amazing, really cornucopia of expertise. So, and finally, really expanding the boundaries of caring, empathy, and most importantly, celebrating complexity. So there's probably no place that is more complex than the farm. And I'm going to just move ahead a little bit to get Jack right up here. But I'm really glad I had the pleasure of working and teaching with Jack last December. Stone Barns hosted its first ever Farmpreneur Fellowship. So 18 kind of high potential farmers from around the country were brought together, really diverse backgrounds and farming operations from like a half an acre to 1,000 acres. And we worked with them to help them develop their visions and their plans, and also to develop their kind of capabilities and courage to step into community conversations. It's interesting. I've been teaching social entrepreneurship here at Berkeley for almost 20 years, and I've participated in dozens of different, pitch competitions and business plan competitions, and I just could never remember a farmer actually being appreciated and acknowledged and celebrated as an entrepreneur, a social entrepreneur. And they're really kind of the ultimate entrepreneurs in my mind, and I think are going to play an increasingly important role. So what a great way to kick off our class this week, and also a great way to connect back to last year's class. Just a year ago, you'll remember Dan Barber, Chef Dan Barber from Blue Hill Restaurant, really Jack's gastronomy partner in crime, was here talking about the third plate and the food system. So without further ado, I would love to have you give a warm welcome to Jack Algier.
Great. I was hoping we would cue that music again, maybe a little bit. So it's really an honor to be here in this space, kind of standing in the shoes of giants here. This has been a place that I've looked to and gotten inspiration for most of my life. And so I'm honored, and I feel like that it's a great opportunity to share some of my story with you, a little bit about me, mostly about this amazing community and system that I work in, and how we're looking for kind of a hopeful future here in the food system. I really liked what you put up there for that, the systems dance, and I'll get to that a little bit. I'll start by saying a little about me. My father returned from Vietnam in 1975 and decided to move with my mother and my older sister to a family farm, a multi-generational farm in Rhode Island, southern Rhode Island, for which I was born on and was raised on this homestead. And in all that time growing up with fresh eggs and goats and having that kind of garden space, it was really built in. It was just the living, growing up in a natural space and in that farm system that it was all one thing. The idea of ecology and food and family and community and sitting around the table, and everything was one whole to me. And I really overlooked it, honestly. I thought I would go to school for music, and I have been a drummer my whole life. And it wasn't really until I was working in high school when I realized that there's a real lot of chemical use. We had all organic farm, and I was working in some greenhouses, and there's really intense chemical use. And these brilliant farmers that I worked with really had given up on the idea that we could continue to grow to the extent that we were growing without these chemicals. Now, I have to say that since that time, and very shortly after, those 4 incredible mentors that I had in those greenhouses have all died from a number of different ailments that were related to open chemicals. And I felt betrayed, and you should feel betrayed, by a culture before us that has underestimated the beauty and nurturing nature of this planet. And I wanted to learn why that was the case. So I went to school for plant science. I connected with my wonderful wife, Shannon, who's here. And the two of us continued to work in biodynamic farming through college, through all this time. And I remember this time myself and being in college and thinking, how do I change this? This seems so insurmountable. There's so much. And now, 25 years later, that seems even more impossible. So I'm going to tell you about my story a little bit now. Really what we're going to talk about is a plate. And imagine that the origin of every meal, the 15 million meals that we might consume together, the origin of these meals started with this unique place, some unique place, and emerged some impulse of creativity by the makers of that created this thing. And really that's the basis of what cuisine is. Around the world, the thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of cuisines that have emerged all over the world in cultures and in whole systems for hundreds, thousands of years even, that have what that land could supply, what it could do. It wasn't just a utilitarian thing. It was an artistic and cultural development. So that's the thing that we want to try to reassociate with. This land here, this gorgeous protected space here that I'm from in the Hudson Valley, New York, is about 3,000 acres of really saved land in a sea of suburb and 30 miles north of Manhattan. So we're here, but it feels a bit like an outpost to me. It always has been. I feel like I was placed there to protect this place. And I was also there to amplify. So fortunately enough for me, I have an incredible group of people that helped to found this place. Families, a community of families that helped start Stone Barns and Blue Hill. So really we have these gorgeous barns that were protected by the Rockefeller family originally, philanthropy, and they handed the land over to State Preserve and to the nonprofit that we are. And within that nonprofit, the Barber family, Dan as my close gastronomic partner, the two of us have really created and developed this dance over all these years that has absolutely inspired both of us to do incredible things and to allow us to take risks that I'm truly honored to be able to have the capacity to be able to do in my life. And I see so much more ahead. So Stone Barn Center and Blue Hill are two separate entities, but we really play this amazing dance together. Stone Barns functions as a nonprofit, so our role is really to be an open amplifier to the world about contact to food and agricultural ideas and connection. And Blue Hill is really a world-class restaurant and dining experience that has created this amazing and very unique way of expressing cuisine. I want to talk about cuisine a little bit because I think often that sense of that term seems like fine dining. But we need to understand that cuisine is something that is much deeper. It is truly something that is a combination of what the land can provide and that creativity that comes from it. So what Stone Barns really is this interdependent community that is open to farmers, entrepreneurs, innovators, teachers, chefs, eaters, everyone that comes to the place in a really multidisciplinary space. In fact, the thing that we really are is a forum, a platform for people to come and learn more, share their brilliance and emerging talents with each other, and walk away with even more than they came with. That's been the great thing about this. And what we are as a model is actually not so literal, but something that can be interpreted in every different community. With all of the urgency, and with the room here and looking at a couple of questions and hearing some of the things that Will was talking about in the news, it's easy to get caught in our heads. It's easy to overthink this and to make it too complicated to even solve. We do have to understand that gathering and celebration is really what is going to kind of help us through this. That I don't want to be misinterpreted here by being soft about this, because I do want to take this approach that makes everybody kind of come down for a minute and say, actually, there is a little bit of room. You don't have to run so far ahead that this isn't something really enjoyable for you, because what is a world that we save that isn't actually a joy? The thing that we're trying to sustain here is a life that is actually something worth living and to learn from and connect to. So it's really simple. We're talking about deep satisfactions in the simplicity of eating and growing. And we're talking about compelling and beautiful solutions to really, like we've said, maybe impossible problems. It's really... So in a world where you can right now Google anything you want, get a definition of anything you want, learn the worst potential, what's happening, potential solutions, whatever. The thing that is really at a loss for all of us is this deep connection to the food system, being able to get back there and touch it. I'm going to tell you a little story about our farm. Actually, I'm just going to kind of walk you through the farm and show you how we think about having this holistic system, but not on its own. Because really a farm is not something that is away and outside of everything. It's actually something of a sanctuary, a place, almost a well of connection for us. If you look at food and that meal and this thing that each of us touch multiple times each day, not only is it a chance to make a better choice, it's a chance to touch and connect with ecology and connect with a positive change in our environment around us. You have that option, and you can make it every day, and it has no relevance to socioeconomic connection or where you're from in the world, that if you're not being blocked by some political edge, then you can live in this way. Traditions have done this forever, and these are things that we need to continue to honor. Contact, curiosity, and community, really. It starts with those things. You brought up curiosity before, which is what really drives us into the beginning of that journey. So this is the part I really love to talk about, because this is the place that I care for. I have an amazing team of farmers and all kinds of folks from the community, chefs. I'll tell you more about those guys later. But I've worked on the land my entire life, and I am blessed to be caring for 350 acres of farmland that, as far as I can see, it's a piece of land that I know in this moment, for this short amount of time in my life, I'm caring for this place. It knows me. When I walk on it, there is something even that lifts me now. There's something like a wind under me. And it keeps getting more apparent to me that this is a real thing. It's a real connection. It makes me light. And I really want other people to feel this. I think not only because it's something, maybe a privilege, which is funny because farmers and people of the land have been so cast out for that. But I want to say that these are the pleasures of what it's like to work on land, to be a part of a piece of land, and to be in all weather, in all season. I'm glad to be here today because it's 6 degrees in New York, but, you know. So we have 350 acres. It's a very interactive system. In fact, it all moves, all of it. The crops, the grains, the livestock, all the way this thing works together. And this is the diet. We're going to talk about what that means a little bit more later here. We also do a lot of indoor culture, all in soil, no chemical use. We do a lot of innovations on the space because part of what we're doing to push forward for farmers is we have this incredible facility, this great farm, incredibly supportive community. It allows me to take a risk, lots of risks, trying new varieties, testing, breeding, testing different methodology that feels right, but I haven't read a study that says that's going to be that will work. Maybe there was a study I read from the 1940s or maybe something from the 1890s that inspired me to think, oh, well, I have some new tools now. I could probably do something a little bit different. And that's great. It's hard for farmers to do that because they're on such a tight margin, but what I'm doing to help other farmers is to push on that edge. So testing with seed varieties, testing with monitoring systems, testing with tools and innovations is helping to make that more efficient, especially on the direct market scale, because all these farms that surround the cities are really the ones that we all have the easiest contact to. And as people continue to move to the cities, that those small farms that surround urban environments. And as far as the census has showed us, they are continuing to grow and become more popular because we're looking, as the food trend changes and people recognize that they can make a change in the food system, we're seeking that out again. We're pulling those farmers back in. And those farms don't need to necessarily solve the whole capacity, but they can give us contact points so that we can make better choices and start to shift the larger farm systems. Inside the greenhouse here, we have a very unique space, and it's something that I like to show because it's really quite wonderful. While there's a lot of investment in indoor agriculture, hydroponics, soilless types of things, these kind of systems are continually generative and nutritious. So this place continues to take less and less material all the time. Right now, it's a freezing space, and it's still producing 25 different crops through the winter. So real low energy, takes one person to operate the space year-round. It's a half-acre greenhouse. And it produces absolutely delicious, live, dense food that really is unmet. On the greater part of the land, I have to say, I wanted to show you the vegetables things first here because of all of that acreage, we have kind of a 90-10 rule that about 10% of the land that we actually grow on produces about 3/4 of the value of the whole farm. This larger acreage is actually the grazing land and the conservation land that actually takes only a couple of people to manage. The animals do most of the work. There's really very little input at all. This is a 100% grass-fed system, multi-species. You can see Mike there on foot behind the animals. There's no haying done on the farm. We're managing a preserve. I'll share that a little bit here. We manage 1,500 acres within a preserve with the state of New York, and we built a conservation action plan where we work with several different universities and lots of different monitoring organizations like Audubon and Yale School of Forestry and that sort of thing, where we're tracking the carbon sequestration, we're tracking the soil, we're tracking water infiltration, and really showing that raising these animals on this land at this density that they're at is actually helping to improve the water infiltration, the water recharge, we're sequestering carbon, we're bringing back bird habitat, all kinds of plant biodiversity from having the animals manage these grasslands for which they are kind of inseparable relationship. The other thing I mentioned on here was that we focus on low-stress stockmanship, which really means we want the farmers on foot as much as possible, because really the farmer's relationship is all in the mimicry that we're working in. And if I have a farmer who's sitting in a tractor all the time or driving around to get hay or doing something like that and not on foot with the animals, they're missing something. And that priority of driving that tractor becomes the thing that's that farmer's job, not this relationship to the whole of the natural system they're in. Things like chickens turn out to be something actually quite different than those other animals, like cattle and sheep. We're running about 70 head of cattle and about 300 head of sheep on 350 acres. So pound for pound, it's a small amount of animals, really, compared to the amount of produce that we produce on it, which gets to the point about meat to the side of the plate. Eat as little meat as possible. I raise a lot of animals, but I certainly don't push people to eat meat. The point is, the animals have a function in the system. We would never raise an animal that didn't actually have a service for our ecosystem. And in fact, is part of how we provide a purpose and a real meaning for that animal. Again, this is an emotional relationship, but it also is a very proven relationship. With chickens eat a lot of grain. In fact, they're not grainivores at all, they're omnivores, but often for egg producers or raising ducks or chickens and turkeys, they really require grain diets to keep up with those genetics and for what people are asking for. So rather than looking at, we have 50 billion chickens in this country, in this world right now that we're eating, which is far more than anyone should ever have grown. And I've been to some of these chicken farms, and they could be 500,000 to 1 million birds in a building. Now, in a building, and all of that food that they're eating. A chicken is an interesting creature because it's only about, well, all poultry, it's about 50% efficient in what they eat. So you take grain from some field somewhere that was raised for that. You bring it to this chicken, you make eggs, and the other half is manure. In fact, it's half of the grain that gets turned into something that is actually really good for the soil if it's put on in a good sort of distributed, balanced way. So we use the birds as kind of a spreader in that space. And rather than having hundreds of thousands of birds in a space like this, we have 800 over 20 acres. And we move them daily. And they move across that space and they feed that pasture. And the interesting thing about that and the cattle, and here I'll also show you about the pigs here, that their service is everything, not their product. It actually doesn't even matter if any of us chose to eat or not eat these animals. They have an actual real purpose that is better than any machine or any handsaw that we could go use, whether in the forest or in a field. So caring for these animals, I think in the end, the enterprise of managing these particular creatures is paid for by the fact that that is what agriculture is, that trade back of that share of that animal, that energetic exchange that happens between raising these animals, giving them a real purpose in a space, in an ecology to improve that space, and in the end, trading that back for the work that we put into that space. It's quite elegant, and it is the diet. So these animals are waste-fed. We call it waste-fed. There's really no waste here. That's one of our tenets. So we're making kimchi from fermented brewer's grain that we bring back and put molasses in. We are taking all of the excess dairy from our local grocer who loves us because their dumpsters don't smell anymore, and old bread, and all of our vegetable scraps, and we've taught all the chefs how to sort, trash, recycle, compost, animal feed. It's a lot of work for us, but it's a lot less expensive. And now we're not on a treadmill of a grain system. The animals are actually eating their great omnivorous diet. And really, in the end, the purpose of these animals is to work the forest soils. So we have these great systems where they work the space, we seed behind them, we send the goats in after them, and we're really taking what is invasive blots of land and turning them into active silvopasture. The farm, in a sense, is a superorganism. In fact, it is a living organism, and all these parts, all the different enterprises or organs, as you would look at them, are interacting and are inseparable. Really, they feed each other, and that's how the resource works. And it's also how the people work together in this space. The farms are not outside of the rest of society. I think people have this sense that that's actually what's happening, is that farms are so removed. And I've walked millions of people around my farm. And I know that when I've walked them around the space, there's still this separation. They're not sure if it's a zoo or a park, or if they should talk to the farmers, or if they're even invited, really, to step into the soil or to touch. This is a really important thing, because you can't learn everything from a piece. If you just visit the farm and then go home and eat, you might make some new connections. Some lights maybe went off. If you ate at a great restaurant like Chez Panisse, for example, lots of light bulbs go off because there's translation there, but the contact hadn't been all the way, you hadn't gone all the way back to. And that's something that I think we need to have more experience on both sides. This eating experience and this contact experience into what is active agriculture, really energetic agriculture. So this is the dance. This is really about the dance. At a place-based cuisine, is an inseparable dance between the vital potential of the land and the cultural imagination of the community. Every place does it different. We all can do this differently, and we can make it happen, and really in a way that is just real joy. So we're going to fly through this because I have a minute. I don't know if anybody's seen this, but this is what the UN has put up as to show the change of what it takes to go from a high productivity, low sustainability model to a sustainable model. I'm going to go through this fast here. This is what I was talking about between agroecology and gastronomy, that the art and ecology of things and how we cook is actually what makes the cuisine in the end. This has more to do with how our farm principles work, and I'm going to fly through some of these other slides here. The important thing I want to point out here, these are tenets for a process of thinking that we use for our farmers. These are our farm principles, but they're also the principles that we use for how we work with the rest of the community. If we're improving our language, whether that's the science or the storytelling or the art, and we're improving the diversity, whether that's plant biodiversity or the diversity of the people that we're working or the ideas that are coming together, and the cycles that if we're closing those loops, then we're really making change. Chefs in the field, farmers in the restaurant, breeders, crop trials, lots of interaction on the farm. So we're bringing all kinds of people together on a daily basis. We're making these wonderful things together. This is a great example of one of our tastings here. We wanted to do a tomato tasting with the restaurant, and the sommeliers came out and they said, you know what, we have some Beaujolais we'd like you to taste. So they bring the farmers in, and this is a little over the top, but I like the picture because here they are. This is melding a couple of worlds here, where wine tasting generally rarely steps as low as tasting a tomato while you're in there. And this was actually quite enlightening. Training students and getting connection across the, especially with high school students, but making change at very specific moments, nodes in our lives, change moments in our lives, whether that's the time when we leave high school or we're in college and there's a lot of shift in our diet, whether that's when we have young families and we're thinking about our children, whether that's when our children leave and we have a new life ahead of us. That those moments of diet change are actually great inflection points to really think and learn and explore these things. So they are audiences for us and folks that we really do focus on to try to bring into that space. We do a lot of tool and innovation work. We have a group called Slow Tools that brings in engineers and manufacturers and farmers and put all of our heads together to create tools that actually fit small diversified farms, which is kind of a forgotten area in the world of equipment, and a certainly necessary thing for farms to succeed and be successful in the future. And I'm so close. We hold an annual Young Farmers Conference every year and lots of different convening in our space. We have this absolutely gorgeous hall and these barns, so the place is just made for lots of people to come and have, whether that's to talk about farming or to talk about investment banking. At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. The experience of being on the farm and finding your own metaphor in a live space changes the way you think. Bringing families and local communities in. It's a really key thing, but in the end, that soil imprint is the thing that will remind us. That's the thing that all of these memories come back to us. We all have it in us, whether we have lived in a city our whole life or we grew up on the farm. It really doesn't matter. We're imprinted with this, and as soon as we go back and we touch it, we get back in a system like that, all kinds of new ideas come. I don't expect everyone to turn into a farmer upon touch. But lots of things emerge, all kinds of memories, and that's the thing we want to use farms for, more than just something that's producing food for people, but rather a place for us to ground ourselves. So I think it's just about getting everybody a little bit out of the headspace. Go visit the farm, go know your farmer, visit them at the market, but find out where they are. And imagining that most of you do know your farmers, and you're invited anytime you want to come to Stone Barns. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Let's sit down over there. When I was with Jack a couple weeks ago, I took this picture of your compost pile. It's something he should be really proud of. It's the most amazing compost pile that I've ever seen. I have an affinity for compost piles, but my daughter, who's now 24, when she was just walking, I mean, she was sort of like 18 months or 2 years, and I took her to Bob Kennard's farm. And Bob is kind of a legendary farmer. You'll meet him in March. He'll be here. And she was standing in front of me. I remember, and Bob took us over to his compost pile, and she, I was kind of got my hands on her shoulders. She felt like a little wind-up toy. She had a lot of energy. And I took my hands off her shoulders, and she just ran right into the compost pile and face planted. And it was like this inoculation moment of, she loves gardening and growing stuff. And so, but I just say that because I think this, we've lost touch. Our fast-paced, urban, tech-centric lives, we've sort of lost touch. And one of the things that we wanted to do for you tonight to reciprocate is we brought you some beautiful food that you get to go shopping after class tonight. So we have some bags for you. You can come down. And Jack, I especially brought the yuzu fruits and the cara lemons so that you and Shannon could take some back to New York.
Well, it's the one thing, citrus.
You don't have it.
Oh my gosh. It's just a dream. January citrus.
So we have, so this is all local, but we have 2 microphones. There's one up there for the top level, and there's one here. And so we would invite you to ask questions. If you have questions at home and you want to try to put them into the chat on YouTube, Victoria's standing by, and we'll try to do that. Also, there were some great questions from some of the students, and the readers worked feverishly this morning to go through your 140 or something questions, and I just wanted to call out Sarah Cadudo. Sarah, are you here? Where's Sarah? Okay, well, is Aaron Aranza here? Do you want to come up and ask your question? Do you want to paraphrase it, or? You had a good question. You could move your mouth and I could say the words. Or if you want to read it you can go to the microphone and you can just, it was for Jack too, so.
Good evening. Mr. Algier, your work at the Stone Barns Center aims to course correct our troubled food system through the promotion of resilient agriculture. However, in contrast to a more industrialized approach to farming, resilient agriculture tends to yield a lower amount of food with a higher price point. Consequently, the expensive price of ethical food renders it impractical for certain low-income populations. As you know, our food system consists of diverse factors that interact with each other across multiple dimensions. In this case, addressing the biophysical factor of renewability seems to come at the cost of socioeconomic factors such as access and equity. Of course, a systems-level solution is less of a definitive prescription than it is an ongoing process of observation and readjustment. Mr. Algier, looking back on your career, how has your implementation of a resilient agriculture evolved in order to make ethically sourced food a realistic option for low-income individuals?
Okay, wait, you get to think about that. Aaron, what are you studying?
Political science with a minor in human rights.
Fantastic. Thank you for that question.
Thank you for that.
We're going to give Jack a few minutes to think about that.
Well, yeah, thank you. While I'm thinking about that,
That's a thoughtful question.
maybe this will
Thank you,
help.
Aaron.
This will whet my palate on this, I guess. So I have 2 sons. Shannon and I have 2 sons, and have been blessed to raise them on a farm and born on the farm there and have grown up in that space, sliding down compost and all that stuff. And both of them used to do this thing, they actually have always preferred to eat the vegetables. They're great eaters. They'll eat just about anything. But mostly they like to eat right out of the space. And they would, just kind of get on their hands and knees and graze over the tops of spinaches. They called it grazing, actually, when they were real little. And, I think about that a lot because often when things are prepared, it seems inaccessible. And there's something accessible about the direct contact to the food itself. And I just want to make that link to your question because there's a lot to unpack there. And I can't pretend to have the solution to this. In my experience over time, one is to not try to solve for this thing from a stress space of creating a thing that is not sustainable for me. In fact, even the land itself has continued to become more of like thinking of myself as really the metaphor for the way I take care of that place. And it's been really reciprocal. So there are a lot of dysfunctions in our society and things that are set up. And so one of the big problems is that people don't know how to cook. And I'll tell you that cooking rice and having some kale is a lot less expensive and certainly a lot better for you to eat than fast food. And cooking rice is not a complicated thing, of course, but a lot of people don't know how to do that anymore. Or their life is so tied to on the move, in a bus. And I wish I had solutions for that because those are bigger social problems that I think a lot of people who have choice have created for those who don't have choice. And I think what will go a long way is more empathy. Because that's what will change the systems that have strapped people into these positions. And so, one, I think people can get more engaged in the way they cook wherever they can. If you can change your habit to find something more intimate with your food, a way to actually use raw ingredients, rather than buying those things. Just doing that alone, I mean, how many of you cook on a regular basis? To me, the time to cook, that time that we take to cook, is just as valuable as the time it takes to eat, because we're using that space. So again, time might be the real issue in this case, because I know for when you are forced to have two jobs or be traveling long way on transportation or don't have a job and don't have access in your neighborhood or transportation at all, then those other problems come in. But I think by and large, the key is to try to get people more engaged in cooking and eating and find some pleasure in that because it can help improve the way of life. And just to finish that thread about thinking about myself too, is that if I know in my life that the land is the same way, if I don't get enough exercise, or if I don't get enough sleep, or if I don't get enough nutrition in my daily, it'll eventually catch up to me. So it's the same things happening with our land, and if there's any lesson that I've learned over all these years is that metaphor is a perfect metaphor. In fact, it's the same issue. So creating solutions to things that are actually really stressful for us to get into actually create more stress for those around us.
I hope we can use the semester to really delve into that question. I think it's one, as we talk to students here at Berkeley, it's on everyone's mind. I mean, we have really problematic food insecurity right on campus. We have, 20 to 30% of students will acknowledge that they don't get enough food, that tuition is expensive and living in the Bay Area is expensive. And so, I think it's something it's on everyone's mind. And I think in fairness to Jack, we should also ask the other guests, because we'll get more of a systems approach too. Because there's certainly answers on the farm and in the kitchen, and there's answers in policy making and in pricing and in trade agreements. It's a very complicated issue. But what I love about that systems dance from Donella Meadows is that expanding, the boundaries of caring. So I think just beginning there is such a great place. So thank you for that very, very erudite question, Aaron. Appreciate it. Could you go over to the microphone? Would you mind doing that? And if you're down here and you want to come to this microphone, if you have a question, that's great. Also, is Chloe here? Chloe. Maybe Chloe after this question. So introduce yourself and launch away.
Hi, I'm Sasha Dimov, and I just want to thank you for coming all the way out here. It's nice and warm. But in the beginning of lecture, you mentioned the grocery delivery apps. And I can't help but notice, but our social medias are like completely plastered in grocery delivery apps, in food delivery apps, everything possible. There's just hundreds of them. It feels like there's hundreds of them. And I understand that it's attractive to go to the city and work for these startups that are, innovating all these cool things, and yet, sure, maybe we could make, ice cream delivery more efficient and get it faster to your doorstep or to your bed. I don't know, but the point is, I feel like we're solving the wrong problems, and I'm pretty sure that the average age of farmers now is like 65, so they're all going to retire, and it seems like there's not enough young people to take over. And my question is basically, how do we start solving the right problems, and how do we channel the youth into agriculture and start fixing all this? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you don't do the clicking thing? The clicking thing too?
Oh, yeah.
I just learned that. I would just say, I'll let Jack answer, but I think it's the way you framed that question and that comment is really beautiful. I've kind of found in my life that instant gratification is an illusion, and we're being marketed a lot of illusion right now. A lot of money is being spent to convince us that having things instantly is actually a value. And it really worries me. And it worries me that the company that is best at that just bought one of the biggest food companies. Because actually, I don't remember the exact number, but Jack will know. It takes like 66 days to grow a carrot, or maybe
It can,
more.
certainly.
Yeah. That's a lot of waiting, before you can pull it up and eat it. So, if you could come to appreciate and extend that horizon of time and care, you'd start to really appreciate. When you grow a carrot yourself, and then you see a gopher come into your garden, it's painful. And then you realize how many times you had to water it and how you took care of the soil, and I don't know, so you sort of revalue, and I think that's what you're getting at, is how do we revalue? So how will you revalue? I love Jack's comment too about go introduce yourself to the farmer. Say, what's your name? Where's your farm? Can I come see it? Could I volunteer for an afternoon? This, touching the soil is so important. I talked to a friend of mine the other day who's she's a garden curator and expert, and she's doing a fellowship to become a garden leader. It's interesting, at Longwood Gardens.
Oh, great gardens.
And she told me that one of the people she's working with is actually studying something called plant blindness, where people actually won't see plants. They'll show people a picture of something. They'll say, what's in that picture? And they'll say, well, there's a building, and there's a car, and there's a flagpole, and they won't see the plants. And she said that a lot of the children that come through on the garden tours actually ask if it's real. Like, is this real? These plants real? So, you know, how do we, you know, I think about like what Alice Waters does with the Edible Schoolyard Project, getting people in a tactile, emotional, intimate relationship with the soil and the food. So I think for me, it just starts with that appreciation of like doing it and how long it actually takes.
Yeah. Yeah, it immediately makes me think of mindfulness, because I'm always amazed that, you know, we grow something and we could grow it for a year or 2 years. Some things like, you know, whatever it might be, it's in the ground, and then we eat it and it's gone, and just like that, it's just gone. We just ate it. I've been caring for this thing for a year, and it just,
Like
you have
these
you have this moment.
These last for 3 weeks, like the whole year, they're on the tree, and then this is a yuzu. You want to smell it later.
Yeah, you just have this one moment to take all that in, but it took so long to get there. So when there is all that instant gratification, of course, it's nice to have something come to you, and there is a certain efficiency in the whole thing. I mean, one of the issues back and forth that's a trouble with farms, and you know, this is entirely unresearched, but I'll tell you that I've seen, you know, from what I've noticed, the food industry has grown tremendously off the back of the concept of local food, and I have not seen my fellow farmers benefit from that nearly compared to what the rest of the industry has taken advantage of. And that seems like a disparity, that a lot comes from the fact that it's, you know, a lot of my heroes are at the edge of their seat right now, or going out of business in organic farming in California and New York. You know, it's a tough business, and people are aging. What gets people in, and I do see a lot of young farmers coming in, is that and even for my own right, I love growing plants, I like raising animals, I like being in nature, but growing food is my social act. It's activism, is a way for me to get involved in my community and feed the people around me. I believed that since I was 17. And I think we should be able to be out there and do that kind of work. So the kind of to-the-door products, in fact, I've you know, trained a lot of farmers that hadn't been able to really make it. They went for a couple of years, got a farm going, tried to get it going, and had made a lot of great connections, and actually are, in fact, the buyers for a lot of those companies now. You know, they're getting bought up. You know, it's good. It's a good poaching ground for those companies to go into those small farms that are, you know, really high-minded and trying to make a go at it, you know, 2-3 years in, and they actually are already trained to be good purchasers, say for a Blue Apron kind of a thing. And so the key there is that companies like that need to continue to be pushed on their ethic and their response back. How are they giving back to the communities that they are, you know, pulling the product from? I think that's really important, and transparency is going to continue to be more and more important in that area, and not just face value.
Chloe, do you want to, we'll have one question from Chloe, and then if you want to come down behind her, that would be great, and that'll kind of wrap us up.
Oh, this is beautiful.
Hello. So I was looking at the...
Just introduce yourself again.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I'm Chloe Betts. I'm Chloe Betts.
Chloe Betts, what are you studying, Chloe?
I'm studying agroecology and food systems in the CRS.
You're a ringer.
A ringer?
No, go ahead. It's just it's a joke. Yeah.
I'd like to be a farmer.
Okay.
So looking at the causes and solutions of agricultural impacts on the environment, one of the ideas to mitigate negative effects is to change diets to a mostly plant-based. As a successful business entrepreneur and having been part of many companies, Mr. Rosenzweig, do you see the solution as an individual level change or something the large corporations to deal with? And to Jack, can the individual level change be done through the demand of local food and local farms? And the idea that sort of spurred this on was, I know back home in Australia, there's a huge push for the dairy. people were having more dairy, and that was sort of a big thing by the government that did that, and that sort of influenced how everybody ate. So people just did it and like that sort of thing. So that sort of, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chloe. So, okay, thanks. Chloe. It takes a lot of courage to get up there. And you asked, is it individuals or, I think you used the word or, is it individuals or is it larger corporations should deal with? And I think, maybe one of the things you'll take away from this class is the notion of both and. I mean, we really have to think in sort of plurality and multifaceted change. So I would absolutely say the answer to your question from my perspective is it's both individuals and it's the corporations. And as Jack said, and to the earlier question, it's sort of how do the eaters influence the companies? How do you put pressure by thinking about every dollar that you spend and with whom? What are you supporting? So one of the kind of emerging stories that gets me excited is that actually one of our Haas grads is the brand manager at a very large company, a subsidiary of a large company, and they're focused on regenerative agricultural products. And they're working with farmers and smaller farms to produce the raw materials, raw ingredients to create a regenerative product line. And they're bringing all of their marketing, mojo to actually create an appreciation and a value for those products. And so, they're delving in, and the theory of change there is that the smaller brand, which is called Annie's, you might have heard of it, they have mac and cheese. Now you can actually buy mac and cheese that's been regeneratively produced. So if you want to participate and, support that, you can do that. So I think it's, but the question to me is like, how do we speed it up?
The word that comes to mind is loyalty for me. There's an interesting relationship that happens. A lot of small farmers end up at farmers markets as a direct market grower, somebody who is working at a scale, maybe 6 acres or 2 acres sometimes. It's a scale that's an actual stable enterprise where the family can, a small family can actually live off of this. Family and a couple of other folks can run a farm that's 6 acres of vegetables and produce enough food. The key is, and the other side of it is that and in fact, it can't really be an other side. The consumer can't be on the other side of this exchange, but part of the same the exchange is a set relationship. And cultures have lasted so long in this relationship of loyalty and of trade, but you don't have to show up in the rain at a farmer's market, but the farmer does. And there are some relationships that have a tendency to just be sort of fair weather relations. A chef, and we deal with this deeply, I have a chef that has thrown his menus out the window because of me. Because we have both demanded a particular kind of loyalty from each other. And I think that is a really key, because the idea of farm to table being a solution because a chef has cherry-picked a market is not the solution for the food system. The solution is that those farmers are growing that thing from their space as best they can, and those products are being celebrated in the way that they cook in that place. And that becomes the catalyst for the way we decide how our choices are made when we buy products that we don't have a personal relationship with the farmer. And those larger scale farms that are outside, which generally may be owned by industry, they'll follow your trend. They will follow that choice to choose regenerative if you buy it. If you don't buy it and you don't follow that loyalty for your own ethic, you will not see it change.
Thank you. I think I'm going to have you come up after, with the time, or next week, but thank you. So I would love it if we gave a big hand for Jack. And I wanted to let you know that next week the topic is transparency. So Urvashi Rangan is here. She's a wonderful, bright light in the food movement. And just to conclude the evening on the notion of serendipity, just think sometime you could end up with a Medal of Honor from the President of the United States. Who knew? So thanks for being here. See you next week at Edible Education 101.
Don't forget your vegetables.
Oh, yeah, don't forget to come up and do a little shopping. You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
I've subscribed to the Smart Wave for years.
Oh, good.
And so it's
Yeah.
so fun to see you.
Oh,
It's actually if you want to
Here
try
we
a
are.
little piece there.
oh, how great.
You know Jesse.
Yeah.